Hello, fifth graders, and welcome to Language Arts. As we get started today, you will need your copy of Gilgamesh. You also are definitely, this one's not optional today, you are going to need paper, a piece of paper, or your notebook, and a pencil. So these are all necessary today. So if you need to pause and go take care of those things, do so, and then come on back. All right, fifth graders, first things first is we're going to go over our answers from yesterday's homework. So give up. Question 1 asks us, what does Siduri say that the gods never meant to have happen? The correct answer was, Siduri says the gods never meant humans to last, which is another way of saying to live forever. So 2, what does Siduri say was more important than immortality? She says that a good wife and family are more important than immortality. 3, what does Urshanabi say that the gods never meant to have happen? Very similar. Urshanabi says that the gods never meant humans to live forever. Question 4 asks, why doesn't Gilgamesh hear Urshanabi's final words? Complete sentence using as many words as possible, we would say, Gilgamesh doesn't hear Urshanabi's final words because he plugged his ears. 5 and 6, you were asked for quotes from the chapter to show Gilgamesh behaving unvirtuously. And as we talked about, there were so many of them. For instance, as he talks to Siduri, right, he says, excuse me, I'm getting lost. He says, wouldn't understand. How can a woman understand, right? Or he says, tell me how I can find Utnapishtim, woman. So again, continues to talk to him in that way, or talk to her in that way. Keep your advice for your customers. Just tell me where I can find Utnapishtim. All would be great quotes. Heroic violence, right? And a lot of you guys had this over and over again. He hacked at the pegs and pulley and cleats and magic symbols. So we see he's destroying the boat, which is lacking a lot of virtue. Good. He screams at Urshanabi, you have to take me over to Paradise Shore. You have to take me to Utnapishtim the Faraway. Plugging his ears even at the end, right? Gilgamesh no longer holding his arms at full stretch, but had his fingers in his ears. So a lot of great quotes that you could have picked for 5 or 6, even more than the ones I said. But I was commenting on those quotes and what you selected on your homework, so make sure you go check that out. And I also commented a lot on your vocabulary words. Some of you doing a great job with these. Some of you, there's still a little bit of room for growth in there as well. So take a look at those comments as you're getting into going back over and really working on making sure we're doing the right work as we move forward. So our objective today, fifth graders, is that we are going to be, while reading this story Faraway, we're going to be plotting a dramatic story arc, okay? So that's what our paper is for. I don't believe you have any more blank copies. If you do, you could always use them. But if not, we're going to right now be working on making a dramatic story arc. So we're going to draw it on our piece of paper. You're going to work with me, and then we'll read, and your homework will be to plot this dramatic story arc. So I'm going to get you guys ready to work with me. So you should have a piece of paper. You're going to want it to be the long way, so not tall, but wide, to make sure that you have enough room. So we're going to be plotting Faraway. Okay. Nope, it's really hard to see all of my stuff. So then we're going to go ahead and draw our dramatic story arc. I'm going to lift this a little so you can see. So remember, the hump of it should be kind of farther to the side here because most of the story is going to be over here. Okay, so we start by drawing our arc. Remember, our first component is the setting, and we need 2 pieces of evidence. So you're going to want to make sure you indicate to yourself to write down 2 pieces of evidence. Following that is what? The rising action. And remember, we're going to need 2 pieces of evidence for that as well. Following the rising action, what do we have? The climax. And we need 1 piece of evidence there. After that comes Our favorite, the falling action. So much of our falling action has involved falling, so we'll have to see if today is the same. The falling action, one piece of evidence, and finally that resolution or denouement. And that's the one piece of evidence. Fifth graders, if you need to pause, rewind to be able to get this finished, feel free, okay? It's the great part about a video. Also, I remind you, quotes, 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 okay? When we are working on our dramatic story arc, we need to be filling in quotes. So not general, not in your own words, but using the author's exact words to fill in. And then finally, remember that as we're filling in this dramatic story arc, we want to make sure that we're starting with setting, but then we go to falling action. This is when we know the fate of our main character, okay? After that, we can fill in the climax and the resolution, and then our rising action. I also want to be really clear. This is in your directions as well, fifth graders, but the part that you are plotting, the part of the dramatic story, or the part of the chapter that you're plotting, is the bottom of page 69 through, thank you for your patience, really to the end of the chapter, 76. So this is going to be kind of a story. This chapter is kind of a story within a story, and that's the part of things that you're going to be plotting, okay? So when you are done with your plotting of the story, you can, or that part of the chapter, that's what you're going to take a picture of and submit an answer or submit work of today. So it's not going to be a form like we've been doing. It's going to be your dramatic story arc. That's your homework, okay? Hopefully you have your dramatic story arc done and you are ready to get into today's reading with me. We are on page 8. Faraway. Not page 8, excuse me. Chapter 8, page 67. Also, fifth graders, one more comment. One year, a student, I happened to wear this necklace on the day that we read this chapter, and a student commented on it being the perfect necklace to wear for this chapter, okay? Since then, I've tried to remember to keep wearing this necklace, so I challenge you to see if you can figure out why this necklace is the perfect one. You can maybe send me a private message if you know why this necklace is the perfect necklace for today's chapter. All right, chapter 8, Faraway. What would he be like, Utnapishtim, whom the gods had rewarded with eternal life? Would he look like Enkidu, thick-set and shaggy? Would he stand larger than life, skin radiating life like the zest from a lemon? As Gilgamesh stood, arms outstretched, remember he's being the mast at this point, catching the wind in Urshanabi's shirt, he saw the shore coming closer, and on it all manner of wonderful sights. A lion sleeping, while a fawn, a baby deer, calmly cropped grass within the circle of its paws. A wolf playing alongside a lamb. The air was full of the sound of wood pigeons crooning, and doves sat in heart-shaped pairs on leafy trees. No snow ever falls here, said Urshanabi the ferryman. The animals live in perfect peace. There's no death for ravens to gloat over. On Paradise Shore, only the hours and the years died imperceptibly, molting like feathers from a swan's back. Then Gilgamesh caught sight of a middle-aged couple sitting together under a hollup tree, he in a hammock cracking nuts, she busy brushing a little white goat. At the approach of the boat, the man in the hammock shielded his eyes to look. He had large, sticking-out ears, a thin neck, and protruding teeth. There he is, man of Uruk, said the ferryman. Not that he will tell you anything different from what I've said. Gilgamesh could hardly believe his ears. This is Utnapishtim the Immortal? The Faraway? Leaping ashore, he went and stood openly staring at the old man in the hammock. He must have looked very menacing, but the man in the hammock did not stir. He simply asked, "Who are you?" "I am Gilgamesh, king of Uruk," he declared, bracing his shoulders, jutting his chin. "My word," said the man, looking less than impressed. "The burdens of kingship must be great these days. Why so haggard and ragged, as if you have seen all the sufferings of the world?" Because I have, said Gilgamesh. I've crossed the desert, scorched by the sun and flayed by frost, traveled through 12 leagues of utter darkness, punted my way across the river of death. And I have grieved too. My friend Enkidu died, and I've sworn never to suffer the same fate. That's why I've come, to learn the secret of immortality from the one man who has it. You would be more, more what? Utnapishtim smiled, amused by Gilgamesh's bewilderment. More full of life, raging and racketing about, wrestling wild beasts to their knees, slaying giants? Yes, 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 yes! Without realizing it, Gilgamesh sat down on the ground, the fatigue of his journey suddenly overwhelming him. Utnapishtim's wife brought him a drink of wine. Why? Where's the hurry? What do I have to prove? When a man has only a few years of life, he feels he must pack them full. Say you were given a small trunk and told, you can carry away with you only as much as you can fit in here. Then, naturally, you would cram it full, wouldn't you? Me? I have all the time in the world. Time is not standing at my back with his whip, making me dance, making me run, making me strive. I've had time to learn the important things are few: a wife, contentment, memories, peace. You should not have put yourself to the trouble of coming all this way, he said at length. It is your fate to live and then to die, just as it was mine to live forever. So this should be reminding us of what Siduri told Gilgamesh, of what Urshanabi told Gilgamesh, and now Utnapishtim is telling him the same things, right? What's important in life are the family and the happiness and the joy, right? And that it's your fate to die. You can't really change that. Ah, but I slew Hawawa, boasted Gilgamesh, and the bull of heaven. On my way here, I slew a whole pride of lions. Utnapishtim nodded, less impressed than Gilgamesh would have hoped. Might I venture to suggest, he said, that the gods prefer their works of creation alive rather than dead? Tell me, said Gilgamesh tersely. Tell me how you came to be immortal. And while he listened, he was thinking, at the back of his mind, what can this man do that I can't? This is kind of a case of thinking, like, maybe this is evidence of hubris. Maybe, right? Gilgamesh is looking at this man and thinking, there's nothing he could do that I can't do, right? He thinks he's better than everyone. Again, that question of downfall kind of hangs there, right? Though, does he have a downfall? Maybe. There's still some book left, so we have to see. So, fifth graders, as we get to this objective of ours, this dramatic story arc, from here on out, this is the part of the chapter that you're going to be plotting. So Gilgamesh really shouldn't appear in your dramatic story arc at all, okay? And the setting shouldn't be happening until from this point on. So this is where you'll start seeing the pieces of evidence coming into play. When Enlil began creating the world, said Utnapishtim, so Utnapishtim is telling this story now, his workmen were his fellow gods, Anu and Ea and Wea and Nergal. But long before the last riverbed was dug, the gods threw down their spades and pickaxes and refused to do another stroke. Then Wea came up with a solution. They ought to create some kind of creature to complete the work. Thus, human beings were created. They were ideal. When they could not work anymore, they died. But there were still enough because they reproduced themselves at such a rate. Soon cities grew up swarming like anthills with industrious little people. The only snag was the noise they made. All day long they quarreled and laughed, bartered goods in the markets, sang or made speeches. They left their babies out in the sunshine, and the mewling and shrieking was more than Enlil could stand. What is that noise? Demanded Enlil. It's the people, said Ea. Busy little things, aren't they? Thin them out, hissed Enlil, nerves frayed from lack of sleep. Send plague to prune the noisiest. So Enlil says thin them out and prune them, which is another way of saying he wants a lot of them. He wants there to be a lot less of them. He wants them to die, so he wants to have a plague come so humans will die. Ea did as he was told. But he had grown fond of humankind and hurried off ahead of Plague to warn them. When Plague arrived, the cities of Earth were silent as mirages, the citizens moving about their business wordlessly, the market traders miming, the babies' mouths plugged up with honeycomb. And while they remained silent, Enlil was content to let them live. But as time passed, of course, as generations came and went, the noise built up again, nagging and squabbling and cheering. Silence their caterwauling, yelled Enlil out of the windows of heaven. Send drought and famine. Perhaps when they are dead of thirst and starvation, these humans will finally be quiet. Well, Ea did as he was told, but hurried ahead to warn the people of Earth. Once again, the cities fell silent. Once again, Enlil relented, and drought and famine withdrew. So Ea continues to try and save humankind from Enlil's decision to have them be killed. But as time passed, of course, the noise built up again. Wars and fairs, circuses and parades, building sites and forges. Enlil slammed shut the windows of heaven. But it hardly made a difference. I will not have this din. Drown the whole pack of them, he bawled. And this time he summoned all his brother and sister gods and made them all consent to the destruction of mankind. And this time, not a word to a soul, not a single soul. Agreed? Shamash bowed his head in consent. Anu grunted and put his fingers in his ears. Even Nergal, who had shaped mankind, agreed. Even Ishtar, goddess of love. Ea, too, gave his consent, though in his heart he was trying to think of some way to rescue the situation. There might just be time to deliver a single message. So, fifth graders, as we continue on with this story, we should be noticing that our main character hasn't quite arrived in the story yet. So that's a hint as we're thinking of climax and falling action. Also, remember, we talked before we started the book that this story of Gilgamesh became very famous because there's this story of a flood in here that reminded a lot of people of a story from the Bible, and then they found a lot of other cultures having flood stories as well. So this is that story that really made Gilgamesh and his story become a famous one. Utnapishtim broke off from his story. 7 generations ago, Shuruppak was my city. I was king there. The god Ea has always been esteemed highly in Shuruppak for his gentleness towards mankind, and I venture to think that he and I were on good terms. Ea wanted to warn me, but because of his vow, could not speak to me directly. So he whispered into the fabric of my house, do you see? The reeds of which its walls were made. Reed house, listen and pray. Would that your walls were torn down today, and from your reeds were built a craft, a huge pitch-covered, roofed-in raft, as tall as she's long, as she's wide and square, that those who board her might then be spared. The doom the gods have ordained for mankind, a flood which once come will leave nothing behind. Do not sleep, keep watch, keep awake, or the thread of life will forever break. So Ea sends a dream to Utnapishtim, and this message in the dream tells him to tear down his house and build a giant ship to survive a flood. That night, when the wind blew on my house, the reeds whispered Ea's words to me as I slept, and I dreamed what I had to do: save all nature from Enlil's damnation. I told the people of Shuruppak that I had been summoned to sail down to the underworld to pay for my sins, and that's why I was building a boat. How could I tell them the truth? Workmen were easy enough to come by as well. I just offered unlimited supplies of roast meat and rough wine. In a week, I had a boat. It had 7 decks in all, each one divided into 9 sections by bulkheads to keep the various animals apart. You can't put gazelles in with lions. I mean, you couldn't in those days. I made the reeds watertight with a mixture of melted pitch, oil, and asphalt. It was big, unimaginably big. It covered an acre of ground, and each side of the dock was 120 cubits long. A cube, in fact. Not a seaworthy shape, not an easy shape to launch. We had to keep shifting the ballast about until she would float 2/3 underwater, stable enough not to turn turtle. So it means it's kind of an unsturdy boat that it would just like flip over potentially in water. I loaded aboard my family, my animals. I took one male and one female of every species, so that afterwards, after the catastrophe, they would be able to reproduce and replenish the earth. I mean, what would the earth be without its animals and birds? In the evening, the rain began. Never seen weather like it. It turned the ground to slurry in an instant. So I went aboard myself, slithering and sliding on the mud slick round the boat, climbing the scaffolding and battened down the last open hatch over my head. It was dark. Only the hissing of the rain on the reeds and tar, as if all the waterfalls of heaven were falling on our heads. But then that was nothing. So fifth graders, as we're thinking about this story arc, we should have a pretty good idea at this point that Utnapishtim is our main character. The central problem is really surviving this flood. And so we have to kind of imagine, as we're thinking of the climax, as we're thinking of falling action, when do we know for certain what's going to happen with Utnapishtim? When do we know for certain whether or not he's going to survive? So that should be kind of in the back of your head as we're reading this chapter. And remember that falling action is going to be very close to the end of the story, very close to the end of the chapter. At dawn, the Lord of the Storm summoned up a black cloud that smothered the whole plain of Shular and Hanish. Water seemed to well up from the ground, from the abyss under the earth. The goddess of the underworld smashed all her dams and let it come fountaining up. The 7 judges of hell came roaming through the land, torches held aloft, so that the sky outside was permanently lit by an eerie flicker. Great rods of lightning wedged between heaven and earth. That storm smashed the land like a cup. The boat was soon riding floodwaters through city and plain and forest. I had to stay at my tiller every moment, or we would have foundered against a drowning palace or snagged on the branches of some tree. I couldn't afford to sleep. For a whole day, the storm trampled the world. You could hear people calling out, unable to find one another for the walls of rain. As the rain beat on them, they all began to turn back to clay, to the substance they were made from. And how can you sleep while that happens? Even the gods were afraid. They climbed up to the highest chambers of heaven, the floodwaters cornering them like cringing dogs against the walls. You could hear the goddess Ishtar howling with remorse because she had gone along with Enlil's damnation of mankind. Aren't they my people? Didn't I help to give them life? Now look at them floating in the ocean like so much fish spawn. She wasn't alone in grieving. All the great gods of heaven and hell put their hands over their mouths and wept at what they had done. For 6 days and nights the storm went on, and not for one moment did I close my eyes or sleep. Even when every animal and every child and every star seemed to be asleep, I stayed awake, my hand on the tiller, praying for deliverance. When the drumming of the rain finally stopped on the 7th day, I threw open a hatch and a bolt of sunlight fell in my face like a bale of yellow hay. I looked out from my ark, and what did I see? Nothing. There was nothing to see, nothing in any direction but water, flat as any rooftop. I don't have to tell you. I sat down and wept. I lay down and cried like a child. The whole of mankind turned to clay, the whole of nature reduced to a slick of red dust under countless fathoms of water. My head was stuffed with sleep. I was reeling with weariness. I didn't know whether to believe my eyes or not, but it seemed to me that about 14 leagues away there was an island. I blinked and bleared at it. Yes, a bare mountain tip was sticking up out of the water. I won't say I steered for it. We were drifting towards it willy-nilly, and there we wedged. For 7 days we sat wedged on that mountaintop, while the flotsam of a lost world drifted by us. Dolls, dishes, gates, wheels, bottles. On the 7th day I brought a dove up on deck and let her go. She flew away, but clearly there was nowhere for her to perch because she came back. The next day I loosed a swallow. You'll remember a swallow is another type of bird. She flew away too, but the land was still drowned because back she came. On the 3rd day I loosed a raven. She circled slowly, blackly into the sunny sky, then flew off. She didn't come back. That was when I knew it was safe to open up every hatch and free the animals from below decks. They lumbered out past me, leaving behind a litter of feathers and fur and a stench I won't even try to describe. I watched them straying further and further from the ark as the mountainside gradually emerged, steaming from under the shrinking floodwaters. I was easily visible from heaven, easily picked off if Enlil was still bent on destroying the entire human race. So he has fear that if Enlil saw him, maybe Enlil would say, I wanted all humans gone, and so he'd kill him too. So I took 14 cauldrons of oil and set them up on the mountainside, lit fires under them of the sweetest smelling wood I could forage. As the fumes went up from those cauldrons, the whole dome of the sky was filled with the sweetest smell imaginable. The gods were drawn to it like flies to honey, like shark to blood. They couldn't keep away. Snuffing up the sweet smoke, they came sighing and swimming through the rain washed air. Last of all came Ishtar, lovely Ishtar, wearing a necklace of jewels that were every color ever given a name: red, amber, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. When she saw that the flood was over, she lifted it off over her head and threw it into the sky, swearing, I shall remember these days. By the jewels of my throat, I shall never forget. She had invented a rainbow, you see. And Leo came, of course. When he saw my boat, oh, I thought he would smash it with a single thunderbolt. What? He yelled. Has one of them escaped? Who warned him? I cowered down under the corner of the ark with my head between my knees, hands over my ears. But then I heard my friend's voice. Ea was speaking up for me, reasoning with Enlil. Punish people when they sin, by all means, but don't destroy them utterly. Where would we be without mortals to dig and tend the earth, to press the oil for our sacrifices, to build the temples for our worship? Do you think we'll take up our tools again in labor and sweat? Think again. Why create the earth at all if it is only to stand empty like some house on a hill, its doors banging in the wind? I didn't tell the man Utnapishtim about the coming of the flood. He had the wisdom to dream it. For 7 days and 7 nights he kept awake, steering the ark safely through the waves. Should such a man die? I had crawled out of hiding to listen. When Enlil turned and saw me, it was too late to duck out of sight again, so I stood up. He ordered me and my wife to go aboard the ark. With trembling knees, we went up the gangplank again and knelt down on the uppermost deck. Up came Enlil, closer and closer, reaching out his hands. Just when I thought I would die of fear, he took both Saba and I by the hand and stood between us. He touched our foreheads and said, Live forever, man of Shuruppak. Make your home on Paradise Shore beyond the river of death, and live forever as we gods do. All right, so fifth graders, your homework, remember, is that dramatic story arc. Hopefully you have a pretty good idea, and maybe you want to rewatch the very end, reread the end to help you with that dramatic story arc as you're placing your quotes. Remember, their author's exact words in that dramatic story arc. And if you have an idea to the answer to my question before, you can make a comment in the private messages to me. Good luck, fifth graders.